me a teenage girl all you want, but Howl is kinda hot, not gonna lie. Anyway, Howl's Moving Castle. Now, I think it's fair to say that this is easily one of the most popular films from this whole list. I mean, come on, have you seen its Letterboxd rating? Many people rank it as one of Miyazaki's best films, and as a result of that fact, they will end up ranking it as one of the best animated films ever made by proxy. Yet, for me, whilst I do still love it, I don't know whether I'd quite go that far, because I do honestly think that the plot can get a little bit messy at points, especially around the end. Like, am I just stupid, or was there no real reason for why the Witch of the West wanted Howl's heart so much? In general, I can find this film a little bit alienating at some points, as it is pretty weird and wacky with these aforementioned confusing plot beats, which I don't entirely understand the thematic or narrative purpose of. And as a result of everything, I consistently found myself feeling disconnected from the end of the film, and this is the primary reason for why I don't think that it's the flawless masterpiece that everyone else says it is. When the last thing that I see from a movie is something weird and confusing which I couldn't get on board with, it slightly dampens the overall experience within my mind. With that being said though, the parts of this film which I can connect with are some of the best things to come out of Studio Ghibli. When all of the pieces of this puzzle fit together, we are left with a beautiful, endearing romance, coupled with an imaginative world which you can just soak into with all of its awe. Now yes, the world building in this movie isn't quite as endearing as the likes of Spirited Away, however it is still really strong here throughout. It's got a unique presentation of magic users, as well as a significant clash in settings between the smoky, dirty, industrial, war-torn areas, and the serene beauty of the natural climates, such as the lake where they hang out the washing, and Howl's safe space. This world is unlike anything which I've seen from any other Miyazaki movie, and this is what Miyazaki truly excels at in my opinion. Oh, and speaking of the world building, the titular moving castle is just a brilliant main setting. It starts out foreboding, but gradually becomes more and more homely as the characters connect with one another more and more, and thus creates a home for themselves. Not to mention, this walking building just looks so damn cool. What can I say, I like me steampunk. But the thing which really works about this film for me are the characters. They are all just so endearing and entertaining to watch, but many of them also have a lot of heart and compassion to them, which thus makes them really likeable and sympathetic. I love Sophie as the protagonist. While she may not be my most relatable Miyazaki protagonist, as Kiki is just like me for real, her self-consciousness is nonetheless still something that a lot of people can connect with. Sophie constantly believes that she's ugly and doesn't really deserve a man like Howl in her life, even though that's not true at all. And this belief is brilliantly reflected through her Asian curse, which actually does make her less conventionally attractive on the outside, which thus reflects her internal thoughts. However, after forming a genuine connection with others such as Howl, she gradually grows more confident and comfortable with herself and the world around her, and as a result, the curse begins to wear off. That is a brilliant symbolic metaphor, and I felt like it was one of the few unexplained parts of the movie that I was actually able to wrap my head around. In fact, on the subject of this point, I think that the main thing that this film is trying to say is that true beauty exists inside all of us. Obviously, Sophie is actually beautiful and charming on the inside, in spite of what our self-consciousness tells her. However, alongside that, we've also got Howl, who has an entire plotline revolving around him losing his heart, and the heart is obviously a thing inside of him. In order for Howl to find himself, he has to learn to grow up and open up to others, instead of hiding away from his fears. He does have a heart, but it's not nearby, and he needs to find it again through connection and love. I swear, Miyazaki is literally the only guy who can get away with a power of love ending. And alongside these ideas of hidden beauty, the film also clearly shows its audience that people may not be like how they appear on the outside. Sophie appears old, but is young at heart. Meanwhile, Howl is introduced as this mysterious but charming figure. And then he has an emo temper tantrum when his hair changes colour, and that's when we realise that this guy's just a big kid who doesn't live up to the bravado set up at the start. Now, I have seen some people criticise Howl's change of character in this scene, but I honestly couldn't disagree more, as I think that it does a perfect job at showing how appearances can be deceiving, as Howl is revealed to not be what Sophie first saw him as. And speaking of acting like a child, this idea of appearances being deceiving is reinforced by characters such as Markle, who takes on the appearance of an old wizard, but in reality, he's actually just a kid, kinda like Sophie in a way. And finally, there's the Witch of the West, who starts out as this evil, intimidating figure, but as soon as she loses her powers, she becomes a funny, senile old lady. It's all great stuff to see unfold. On the whole, I felt like the characters and their interactions were the main thing that kept me hooked on this film, in spite of my confusion that I may have had at points. In fact, my favourite parts of the movie were all the scenes where everyone just kind of vibed in the castle and had breakfast while Sophie cleaned. It was hella charming and sweet and really funny as well. Oh, and I obviously can't talk about these scenes without mentioning Calcifer, who is an absolute legend. I just love this little fire demon so much, that's all I have to say. So yeah, these characters are great to watch, and I love how they form a kind of found family by the end of the film. It is wholesome as heck. But this film isn't quite as wholesome as other Ghibli films, as it is also an anti-war piece at the same time. Now, I admit that it took me a while to fully appreciate the war parts of this film, because I initially felt like it kinda clashed with the sweet character moments. However, I have since come around to the war stuff, because the clash is kind of the point. It's meant to show how even the sweetest relationships, such as the one between Sophie and Howl, can be destroyed by the impacts of war. For example, after that glorious scene in Howl's safe space, we see bombers fly past, and are unfortunately reminded that a war is happening, and that ends up taking the characters out of the beauty of the moment, and reminding them of the horrors of reality. Alongside this thematic clash, the anti-war messages itself are so strong. You see, this war only started because a prince went missing, which one side blamed the other for. However, in reality, the prince was turned into the scarecrow who we see throughout the film, and this transformation was caused by a witch who wasn't even associated with either side of the conflict. So, many people presumably died for literally no reason other than a misunderstanding and a belief that one side was more dangerous than they actually were. Gee, I wonder if that sounds familiar. Yeah, if you couldn't tell, this film is an allegory for the Iraq War, but it's not too linked into it, as the film's ideas can still apply to any conflict and work just as well. So yeah, I really like the anti-war stuff on the whole. Apart from the scenes with Sullivan, it kind of felt a bit irrelevant at points, and I honestly kept forgetting about its existence. It's pretty telling that when she reappeared at the end of the film, my legitimate reaction was, oh yeah, you exist. So yeah, I once again want to reiterate that the ending is what's letting this film down for me. But I feel like another 5 rewatches may turn my opinion around. I mean, it is possible. After all, I appreciated the time travel shenanigans a lot more on this latest viewing after initially being put off it, as I thought that was quite poetic that Sophie, the girl who initially believed that she wasn't good enough for a man like Howl, was the one who had to ultimately bring Howl happiness by telling his past self to look for her. Also, call me crazy, but does this ending remind anyone of the ending of Interstellar? Like seriously, they are beat for beat the same. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if Christopher Nolan watched this film and got inspired by it, considering the fact that he's very clearly taken inspiration from other Japanese animation directors, like Satoshi Kon, because Inception is basically just Paprika. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Let's rein it back in and wrap up my thoughts on this film. Overall, House Moving Castle is an unbelievably sweet and imaginative movie with a lot of heart to it. It's a film with a rich world, wonderful characters, and so much charm and detail that you can very easily rewatch it over and over again. And just like other Miyazaki films, the animation is top tier and Joe Hisaishi is the GOAT. And on that topic, Merry-Go-Round of Life is one of my personal favourite film themes. It is absolutely beautiful in every way. So yeah, technically this film is excellent, but it's also really enjoyable and thematically rich. It's got a wonderful romance at the heart of the narrative, which also clashes well with a horrific war that's happening in the background. It is all just brilliant to see unfold. But I do still currently find the ending a little bit messy and alienating. Oh well, whilst it's definitely the best of the 2005 batch, I can't exactly say that I'm upset that it lost the Oscar, as Miyazaki has still won for other films, and I love Wallace and Gromit too much to care. Make something better than Wallace and Gromit then, bozo.
Speaking from one orphan to another, Goldie, you won the orphan lottery.
Okay, I just want to say right off the bat that I am going to refer to the film in this segment as My Life as a Courgette. I know many sources will say that it's called My Life as a Zucchini, but this is a French-Swiss film, and in those countries, they say the word courgette rather than zucchini. So that's what I'm going to call it. If you watch the film in its original language, the character of Courgette is called Courgette, so I'm going to refer to the film by its proper name. Anyway, My Life as a Courgette is notable because it is by far the shortest film which I'm going to be discussing on this list, as it has a tiny runtime of only 66 minutes. 66 minutes. I have seen so many 3-hour films in my life recently that a runtime as short as that just feels weird. But thankfully, this film is really simple, which thus accommodates the short runtime well, as there isn't really much of a plot here outside of one storyline which emerges within the second half of the film. Instead, this film is more of a low-key observation into the tragic life of orphans. We follow Courgette as he ends up in an orphanage after being inadvertently responsible for the death of his mother, and the film essentially plays out as a series of events which occur within the orphanage, as we follow Courgette's journey to get used to his new situation and make connections with the other kids there. And yeah, that's kinda it. There's no big twist or sudden dramatic change within the arc of the narrative. What you see is pretty much what you get. But it works really well, with the focus being so limited on this one setting and the struggles that our protagonist faces within that setting, we are able to easily immerse ourselves into the emotion of the film. And the interesting thing about the emotion of this film is that there aren't many moments which are explicitly designed to make you feel sad or anything. There are no sudden gut punches or shocking moments here. Instead, the film works by creating a general feeling of tragedy which permeates throughout the runtime. It's upsetting to see what some of these kids had to go through, and you only wish for things to become easier for them. And I think that these feelings of tragedy culminate within that scene in the snow, where a mother is seen comforting her son and giving him a little kiss on the forehead, before it suddenly cuts back to the kids watching this unfold. They don't say anything, they just stare, knowing that they don't have this kind of parental love within their lives. Nothing within this scene is explicitly sad, but the implied tragedy of the film makes this particular moment really heartbreaking to watch. This image is one which has stuck within my mind long after watching, because it's one of the most effective screenshots from the whole movie. However, the ultimate reason for why the tragedy of this film works so well is because it's actually contrasted really nicely with plenty of surprisingly sweet and wholesome moments. Yes, it is really sad that Courgette lost his mother, but it's equally really nice to see him eventually make do within the orphanage as he connects with others, including Simon. Now, at the start of this film, Simon was a horrible bully, but eventually, Courgette and the audience grew to sympathise with him, and that allowed for the pair to become more friendly with each other and move past their differences. The growth was nice to see unfold, and actually reminded me a lot of Jamie in The Devil's Backbone, as they're both bully characters who actually have a lot of tragedy behind them, which thus fuel their actions. But eventually, you grow to sympathise with them. And alongside Simon, there's Camille, who Courgette forms a really strong connection to, and let me tell you, these two are really wholesome to watch together. They've got a great dynamic, and I bought their connection immensely. So yeah, Courgette's interactions with the other orphans helped to make this film really nice to watch once the characters have found the time to get to know each other. And this eventually leads on to the wonderful ending where Raymond adopts Courgette and Camille. Now, Raymond had no reason to do this. He was just a police officer who filed a report on the mother's death and drove Courgette to the orphanage. By all accounts, his duty ends there. Yet he still took time out of his day to check up on the lad, because he genuinely cared for him and wanted him to be okay. And then he allowed Courgette and Camille to stay for a day, which very clearly made them happy. And so, by the end of the film, he selflessly decided to adopt the pair of them, and he made sure they adopted them both because of their strong connection to each other. That is such a nice thing for him to do. No one asked him to adopt the kids, yet he did it anyway because he's a genuinely nice guy who cared about Courgette's well-being and knew that he needed the support. This is what I mean when I say that the film is surprisingly wholesome in spite of the underlying tragedy of the whole thing. Stuff like this just brought a smile to my face, and I think that the light and dark elements of the film work perfectly in tandem to make every element of the movie even stronger, as I don't think that the ending would be anywhere near as satisfying or wholesome if it wasn't for the darkness that permeated throughout a lot of the runtime. This film is sad to watch at many points, but it can also be really sweet, and I think that this combination helped me to get a lot out of it. Yes, what these kids have gone through is heartbreaking, but there is always hope for them, and if they were able to get rid of Camille's horrible aunt before she caused any more harm, then they can do anything. This therefore makes the film really hopeful in a way. Alongside being quite wholesome, the film is just really funny at many points. I particularly found myself laughing a lot at the end of the film, where the kids started talking about sex despite the fact that they had no idea what it was, and thus they started babbling on about exploding wieners or something. That part got me so off guard, but it did make me laugh quite a bit. Despite how inappropriate their conversation was, it is very accurate to what kids are like. So yeah, I loved a lot about this movie. But honestly, I just wanted a bit more from it. Yes, the simple story works wonderfully well within the short runtime, but personally, I would have liked a bit more expansion on certain things, and I would have especially liked to see more of the other orphans outside of Courgette, Camille, and Simon. These kids were definitely fun faces to see, and they added a lot to the film's atmosphere, but they weren't the most distinct or compelling as their own characters, and I would have liked to have gotten a bit more with them. I mean, for instance, there was some heavy stuff implied with Alice, but I don't think that it, or its impact on her, was really explored that much, and maybe if it was, it would have added quite a lot to the emotion of the film. Although, it could be argued that this kind of stuff isn't as important here, as this is ultimately Courgette's story first and foremost. And for what we got, his character and the journey that he went on was practically flawless, so the film nonetheless succeeded in what it set out to do. So overall, I really loved My Life as a Courgette. I thought that it balanced dark themes and feelings of tragedy well with small moments of comedy and a wholesome conclusion. It also has a really nice looking unique stop motion style to it. It is a film which surprisingly had a lot to say in just 66 minutes, and I found it to be a really compelling, impactful watch which I got a lot out of. It's not my personal favourite of the 2016 batch, but I totally understand if someone says that it deserved to win. I would have been perfectly happy if it did after all. What else can I say? I love the fan family trope, so it's no wonder why I loved this film.
You're a little guy for you.
Alright, I'll be brutally honest. I may have chuckled a little bit when I saw the A24 logo presented at the start of Marcel the Show with shoes on. I don't know, I just associate the company with weird live action stuff, so seeing them responsible for the distribution of a popular animated project just took me by surprise. Usually it's G-Kids who handles these artsy animations, but nope, A24 did this one. Although to be fair, Marcel is about as close to live action as you can get from this whole list. I mean, some would even argue that this film shouldn't have even been nominated for this category, because it's practically no different from other films which feature animated characters in the real world, like Paddington or something. But apparently, 75% of the film featured animation, so it counted for this category. Whether you agree or not is up to you, but nonetheless, I'm glad that I was allowed a nomination as it gave me an excuse to watch this film. And I'm so happy that I did because this is such a wonderful and charming little movie. It's very simple, no doubt, but I nonetheless remained invested throughout, and I think a large reason for why is thanks to its presentation. Because you see, just like Surf's Up, this film is a bit of a mockumentary, and I completely forgot to acknowledge its existence when I discussed Surf's Up. Whoops. And this style of filmmaking helped to make the experience very unique. There isn't much of a plot here for a lot of the runtime, and so instead, the film aims to use documentary techniques to give a realistic look into what the fictional character of Marcel's life is like. It gives the film a level of authenticity, which helps to make it so easy to engage with the characters as they all feel so real. It feels like Marcel can be a part of your house, and that helps to create an immediate connection to him. And a major thing which helps with this realistic feeling is the animation. Oh my goodness, I have no idea how this film was made. I mean, it's already impressive to see movies seamlessly integrate CGI characters into live action environments, but it's another thing entirely to see a stop motion character interacting with the real people. This little dude had to be animated frame by frame, and I have no idea how on earth the filmmakers were able to integrate this precise form of animation into the real world. It is a stunning accomplishment, and if this was the reason why the Academy threw this film a bone and gave it a nomination, even in spite of its dicey categorization, then honestly, I think it's fair enough. It is utterly spectacular to see unfold, and it adds so much to the authenticity of the movie, which thus helps me to get even more immersed into the experience. Oh, and speaking of authenticity, I loved how realistic Dean felt. He could have so easily been a nothing background character who only exists to film Marcel, but he did actually have stuff to him. He's an easygoing guy which makes him nice to hang out with, and he's just performed in a very naturalistic, believable way, which thus makes him quite a relatable everyman who the audience can see themselves in as they observe Marcel. But the stuff of his divorce, whilst minimal within the narrative, helped to give him a lot of depth, which thus added to the authenticity even more. Now obviously, seeing the real life director of the movie play a version of himself on camera can potentially be seen as a bit of an ego move, but in this case, it feels very genuine and helps to make the film more personal, so I didn't mind watching Dean play Dean as it just made sense to me. So yeah, thanks to all these aspects, I found the film really easy to vibe with, which thus helped in my initial engagement to it. But I also thought it had some interesting things to say about content creation and exposure. First of all, this film very cleverly used the popularity of the original Marcel shorts as a springboard for this film's narrative, and I liked how accessible this film was to people like me who had never seen anything Marcel related beforehand. The original shorts are only used as a way to give Marcel exposure, and the film does a great job at showing the positive and negative outcomes of that happening. The exposure is a problem because Marcel ends up doxing Dean's house and now poor old Dean has to deal with annoying TikTok influencers. But the exposure is still shown in a positive way at the end, because Marcel was able to use it as a way to eventually find his family. It took trial and effort, but thanks to the help of others, including Leslie Stahl in 60 Minutes, Marcel was eventually able to reunite with his community, and that was just beautiful to see. The internet and other media can be horrible, but at its best, it can be used in a way to truly help someone. And in this case, the combined efforts of those online and those on TV helped Marcel find what he was looking for, and that was just lovely to see. In fact, this whole movie is just so sweet and wholesome. Yes, it had emotional moments, particularly when Isabella Rossellini dies, but it still remained so cute and pleasant throughout, and it all culminated within the ending, which I can safely say gave me the warm fuzzies. Although, on the topic of that ending, I think it also did a great job at expressly showing the difference between audience and community. You see, Marcel had a large online audience, but he still felt alone because all of these people who love him are just texts in a livestream chat. Speaking of which, these messages were very authentic to real life. However, Marcel eventually feels like he belongs once he finds his community of real people, or shells, who understand and care for him. This distinction is great to see and was important for a film like this to cover, seeing as it is very much based around social media and whatnot. So yeah, I love so much of what this film was going for. It's immersive, a technical mastery, it's got simple yet effective emotions, and it's just so nice to watch. And add on to that the fact that the film is also really funny, largely thanks to Marcel being an absolute sass machine, and you've got a film which just works for me so well. In fact, I don't really have any issues with it, to be honest. Literally the only reason for why it's not ranked higher on this list is because I just like other films more. But that can't take away from the fact that Marcel is brilliant, and I totally understand why some say that it should have won this award. I mean, I prefer it to Pinocchio after all. But there is still one more movie from the 2022 batch, which I love a whole lot more, and I'll talk about it way later. But for now, I'm going to keep on talking about the movies which I adore wholeheartedly.
You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel.
Zootopia is a very special movie to me. It was a childhood favourite of mine which eventually went on to fundamentally shape a large part of my life, and I'm sure you can guess how. And it's a movie where, in spite of all the criticisms which I've heard leveled towards it throughout the years, I still adore watching. Although I definitely don't love it as much as I used to, due to the fact that some of my opinions have gone on to reflect some of these aforementioned criticisms. I mean, let's just put my changing opinions this way. In my old 2021 film ranking, which you shouldn't watch by the way because my opinions are so outdated, I put Zootopia in my top 10 for that list. Yeah, even by that time, it was still one of my favourite movies. Yet nowadays, it's not even in the top 10 for this list. And honestly, that kinda sucks. I really do love this film so much, and I still want to say that I adore everything about it wholeheartedly. But there's just one teeny tiny little problem with this film. Bellwether fucking sucks as a twist villain. For years, this never really bothered me, but now that I'm a bit older, I just can't defend it anymore. It is such a noticeable weak point within this film. Now to be fair, I don't think that she's the worst twist villain ever, and I'd still take her over Professor Callahan, because the motivations are a bit more clear, and also we aren't meant to sympathise with her, as she's just openly a racist who needs to be brought down. But at the end of the day, she still gets barely any time to be a villain. Hans had about 20 minutes of screen time, and Bellwether had 10. Literally all she does is get her henchmen to incapacitate Judy, dart Nick, and then monologue for a bit. That's it. It's really not that interesting. Now to be fair, I do understand why things ended up this way. This is a mystery film first and foremost after all, and films like this tend to hold off on presenting their antagonist. But the thing is, this is a different kind of mystery to something like Knives Out, where the tension comes from the whodunit. This film meanwhile acts more like an action movie rather than an explicit mystery box, and so it needs additional tension from a clear-cut threat in order to work properly. So, whilst I still think that having Bellwether be the twist villain is fine, she should have been a more explicit, prominent threat within the wider narrative. Either have her revealed as the big bad before the final act, which could then lead into a storyline where Nick and Judy have to covertly take her down while she spreads lies as the mayor, or reveal to the audience only that she's the villain way beforehand, so that you can use the classic Hitchcock technique of building tension, where the audience knows that something bad is going to happen, but the characters don't. This would have added a lot to the final suspense of the film. Although, to be fair, I do still like that final Bellwether scene a lot. I think that there is a lot of great tension with Nick being darted, and the blueberry switcheroo and payoff with the carrot recorder was clever, satisfying, and a great little twist. But still, we needed more of this, and more of Bellwether to be able to truly feel the weight of her actions and presence within the story. Furthermore, there's not enough build-up to Bellwether's reveal. Like, if you rewatch this movie, literally the only hint towards her nefarious deeds is one post-it note with Dr. Ram's phone number on it. I mean, it's a cool detail, don't get me wrong, but it's nowhere near enough, and it is way too subtle for your average audience member. So yeah, whilst I don't think that Bellwether is the worst thing ever, she does still stand out as the biggest problem with this movie for me, and it does therefore hinder my enjoyment of the experience near the end, as I just get frustrated at the missed opportunities with her character. However, the reason why I wanted to get this point out of the way first is because I want to emphasize the fact that with this one exception, I adore the rest of this movie, and if it wasn't for my increasingly sour opinion on this twist, then it would still be one of my favourite movies of all time. I am dead serious, I adore so much here. I mean, right off the bat, the story of this film just appeals to me a lot. Personally, I love a good police procedural. I love the vibe of them, I love the mystery which often defines them, I love a good buddy cop dynamic, and yeah, I just find these films really engaging, and Zootopia captures all of these right vibes perfectly. Oh, and on this topic of procedurals, I just want to give an example and say that I love the show Luther. If you don't know it, it's a British police drama which stars Idris Elba, who also plays Chief Bogo within this movie. Yes, that's the reason for why I randomly brought up this show, as I am convinced that the production team must have been a fan of Luther, and thus cast Elba in the movie for that reason alone. But anyway, thanks to its great story and vibes, Zootopia is always a consistently engaging watch for me with plenty of fantastic action throughout. I love the rodent town chase, the rainforest battle, and the ending on the train. There's a great variety between these scenes, and they're all so much fun to watch. And then there's the mystery itself, which still captivates me, even though I know all the twists and remember every scene like the back of my hand. And the reason for why it still works for me is because the way the film is presented just keeps me engaged in spite of my knowledge from previous rewatches. Once again, there's a great variety of different locations being explored, and I love the ways that the film tricks you into thinking its story is going to go in one direction, before eventually revealing it's a different thing entirely. I feel like these tricks help to make the film great, even on a rewatch, as additional tension comes from the fact that you know that Judy messed up with her initial biology hypothesis, and thus caused more harm than good, and trust me, we will get back to the consequences of this later. So yeah, I think this film captures the vibe of the fun but engaging police procedural mystery really well, and because I already love those kinds of movies, this naturally appeals to me too. But I think with this point, it's worth acknowledging the whole propaganda argument which can be leveled against this movie, and against my love for police procedurals. Now, my stance on this is that if you don't like these kinds of pro-police movies, that's perfectly fine and understandable. But for me, personally, I can often separate these films from reality. I do have a lot of issues with the actions of the police in the real world, like many people do. But I still personally enjoy a lot of cop movies, because many of them are just pure pulp. When taking a Lethal Weapon movie literally, yeah, it can be pretty dodgy, but I still enjoy it because the characters are fun and the action is cool. And, most of all, it's a silly movie at the end of the day. It is purely a work of escapist entertainment, which may not work for everyone, but I personally don't mind watching it. Hell, even a more politically charged movie like Dirty Harry, I still personally enjoy. I fundamentally disagree with a lot of the film's politics, but I still like the movie because it's cool. It's a well-made movie with slick direction, which I can very easily get swept up into the aesthetic and entertaining qualities of. But if someone told me that they hated it, I would fully understand. But for me personally, I can often separate my own private political views from what a movie believes, and will therefore still enjoy it even if I disagree with what it says. And this same point applies to pro-cop movies like Zootopia. Yes, there's plenty of things that you can criticize it for, especially nowadays, but I personally don't mind as much because I can very easily separate it from reality. This is a movie about anthropomorphic animals after all. It may have ideas which link into the real world, but there's always going to be a disconnect from the fiction and the reality. And on that unrelated point, this is why you should never base your beliefs around one singular thing, and should instead make your own decisions which are informed from a variety of sources. Art can influence you, but it should never dictate you. I may get a lot out of this movie, but if I follow it to the letter, that's a problem, and that point can apply to basically any person with any work of art. So yeah, with these points in mind, I feel like I can personally criticize the real corruption and injustice of the police force, while simultaneously enjoying a fun buddy cop movie in spite of that fact. Although, with that being said, I still don't like the fact that Judy resorts to using a mob boss to torture a suspect. That part was pretty dodgy, I'll admit, and it kinda took me out of the film's alignment to her character. But with that major exception, I still enjoy the rest of this film. And seeing as I'm on the topic of talking about this film's politics, I feel like now's the time to talk about the racism allegory. Now, I just want to preface this discussion by saying that I am a white guy, so my experience and opinions will be different from the ones made by people of colour, so I admittedly can't really give a proper, even-handed look into the allegory of this movie, as I lack that personal experience. So instead, I'm going to have to base a lot of what I say on what I've heard from other, actual people of colour. So, with that in mind, I'll just say right off the bat that the allegory within this film isn't perfect. But I respect it nonetheless and can appreciate and enjoy the film for what it is. As I said before, there was always going to be a disconnect from fiction and reality, particularly within this film's case because our worlds are so different, which therefore means that there was always going to be a difficulty with translating the allegory to our real modern world. So it's only inevitable that things can go wrong. And in this film's case, I think that there is a valid argument which can be made against how this film portrays the racial minorities as literal predators. Yeah, you can take a very bad reading from that, and I think that this is a very fair point of criticism which can be leveled towards this movie. But personally, it didn't impact upon my enjoyment of the film, because I can still see what it was going for when it used predators as its allegory for prejudice. And this is because I personally see the film as a commentary on the perceived danger that people feel towards minorities. Due to Bellwether's actions and Judy's miscalculation, all predators are perceived as dangerous, even though it's only a few acting out, and they only did so due to the influence of others. The lies and propaganda is ultimately the thing that caused the racial tensions, and this parallels a lot of real-life race riots, where hate is created out of these lies, which thus leads to fear and innocent people suffering. It's disgusting to see in real life, and these tensions were captured within this film remarkably well, as the film brings a lot of emphasis onto the fear that people feel within these instances. Whilst you can definitely criticize the film for literally portraying racial minorities as predators, I personally didn't mind as much because the allegorical usage of predators allowed for the film to portray the perceived fear which is at the heart of a lot of racial tension, in a way which fits within the film's world. Now yes, would it have been better for this film to just be about humans in realistic situations? I mean, duh, of course the message would have been more impactful and arguably better handled, but you gotta remember who this film is actually made for. At the end of the day, this is not a race story for adults. If you want that, there are so many other films which you can watch instead. Don't watch Crash though, that movie sucks. Rather, Zootopia is a way to directly show off these real issues to a younger audience. Kids are drawn to talking animal movies, so they'll naturally be more willing to watch this movie over some gritty adult drama, which thus means that they'll have the opportunity to take these themes on board in an easy to understand way. The themes may be basic in execution, but that's because 9-year-old Timmy's media literacy isn't developed enough for him to appreciate a Spike Lee joint, so films like this work as the next best thing. And I can personally state that as someone who still lives in a largely white area of the UK, who saw this film as a young lad when it came out, it was definitely one of the first instances which I can think of where I was exposed to the real issues of prejudice. I never saw prejudice firsthand in my life, so this was what helped me to understand the concept. And as I started to come to terms with the evils of the real world, this film worked well as a great baseline for me. Using this film as a point of comparison helped me to grasp all of these difficult concepts much easier, and I'm certain that this was the reason for why this film was made. If you were already an adult when you first saw this film, it's no wonder why it probably didn't leave as big of an impact on you. But for me, this movie was a formative part of my childhood, and thus, its themes came about at the perfect time for me, which therefore means that I'm naturally a bit more forgiving of the film's faults, because the overall experience was nonetheless very impactful for me. The themes of this film are imperfect, and parts of it are divisive, even amongst different people of colour. I mean, I've heard so many people call the film effective, and so many others call it offensive, for instance. But, like with all art, what you get out of it is your own personal opinion, and for me, I found it effective. My opinion was shaped by the fact that I'm a white guy who saw this movie as a kid, which thus means that black audiences who saw it as adults will inevitably have a different opinion to myself. But that's okay, and this inevitability is exactly why I wanted to express my views on this film's politics in a level-headed way which acknowledged both sides of the argument. You can fundamentally disagree with everything I've just said, but this is how we should discuss art. We should talk about it in a level-headed way where we respect and acknowledge those who may disagree. So, in short, I didn't personally mind how this film handled its allegories because I can personally create a distinction between the reality and the fiction, and I can see what the filmmakers were aiming for when they made this movie. And, most importantly, I can personally confirm that its themes were effective for me at a young age, and were thus therefore important for me to learn when I did. So yeah, I still personally love this movie in spite of everything, but I'm chill with the fact that others may hate it. Anyway, that was a long divergence into politics, and I do want to apologise for that, but it's kind of impossible to avoid talking about that stuff when covering this film. But, now that I've covered the divisive aspects of the movie, let's get back to talking about the fun stuff, because, in spite of all the serious messaging, this is still a buddy cop comedy at the end of the day. And my goodness, it works so well as a buddy cop comedy. And the primary reason for why is because Nick and Judy are amazing characters, and are probably my favourite Disney characters of all time. Their dynamic is just pitch perfect in every way. The way they bounce off each other is top tier, especially during moments where they discuss things like Nick's tax evasion, and they balance out funny banter with a genuine growing connection really well. However, their dynamic ultimately works because they are not only fun together, but are also both really interesting characters on their own merits. First of all, Judy is a great flawed protagonist. While she is sympathetic in some way, as we do get to see the ways that she's been mistreated in her life, you can still very clearly see her many faults, such as with her own prejudices towards foxes like Nick. Some of these beliefs can be seen explicitly, but a lot of it is a much more subtle, implicit bias, which I found compelling to see. But alongside that, I also found it interesting to see the ways that Judy perceives herself as being more of a victim than she really is. She gets easily offended when called cute, not realizing the irony of calling out others for saying inappropriate things when she's simultaneously so damn patronizing towards Nick, but she also gets upset over being assigned to parking duty. She assumes that this only happened because Chief Bogo is prejudiced towards her, but when you stop and think about it, she literally just joined the force. Of course she's going to start out with safer, less glamorous jobs, as that is literally just standard procedure, and her later insubordination deserved to be called out by Bogo. So yeah, the film makes it clear that she is a flawed character, but it's great to see her grow thanks to the influence of Nick. And on that topic, Nick Wilde is my favourite Disney character of all time, and there's many reasons for why. Not only is he hot, but he's also funny and cunning, and also very deep and caring. Seeing him gradually become more helpful over the course of the film was satisfying to see, but at the same time, I feel no ill will towards the ways that he acted at the start of the film, considering the fact that he has always been dealt such a bad hand in life, as shown in that heartbreaking backstory scene, which I always found really hard to watch, not gonna lie. It adds a lot to his character, but he still remains an entertaining face within the film. And on the topic of these characters, I think that this film has one of the best uses of the main character split up before being reunited again in the climax trope. The reason for why it works so well here is because it isn't caused by some tedious misunderstanding or lie reveal, but instead because Nick felt betrayed by Judy's actions. The characters split because Judy's faults have reached a new high, which thus upset Nick, and the pair can only rejoin once Judy owns up to her fault and apologizes. Their split and reconciliation is a great showcase of their characters, and it once again reinforces the prejudice theme. And speaking of which, this segment of the movie definitely had the most impactful imagery related to this theme, especially the part where the mother pulls her child away from the tiger, and Nick comments about there being a them now. These moments are really powerful for me, and are another reason for why I personally admire what the film was going for with its themes. So yeah, I've talked a lot about the drama of this film, and the main dynamic which permeates throughout, but there's so many other great things to discuss here, such as the world building. Now, there's definitely plenty of furry movies out there, and I love so many of them, but none of them quite reach the same heights of its world building as this film. Because you see, this isn't a normal world which just so happens to have anther animals in it. Rather, it is a world designed around the fact that the characters are animals. The city of Zootopia accommodates for all shapes and sizes, and has different biomes to reflect how different animals live within the world. There's hot climates, cold climates, humid climates, etc, etc. And this is just a genius way to bring the world to life, as everything here just makes sense. I'm sure if you squint hard enough, you can find ways to criticize this world. But for me, everything here just felt so logical that I wasn't personally questioning anything. Instead, I thought that it was brilliant, and that opening train ride especially did a phenomenal job at visually showcasing how this world works. Oh, and speaking of that scene, I just want to say that I love the Shakira song unironically. I know it gets a lot of hate, but I genuinely do not care. I think it's a bop. Maybe I just have garbage music taste, I don't know. And the final thing which I want to discuss here is that this movie is so damn funny. I already mentioned that Nick and Judy have perfect chemistry, and that does definitely lend itself well into a lot of the film's humour. But alongside that, there's plenty of great side gags related to the different animals, there's plenty of lovable side characters, certain scenes like the DMV one leave me howling with laughter on every rewatch because it is so real and so depressing in the funniest way imaginable, and the bloody references here are legendary. I mean, come on, we've got a Breaking Bad spoof where two of the Rams are called Walter and Jesse, and we've also got a Godfather parody with Mr. Big, and let me tell you, I could not take the real Godfather movie seriously when I got around to watching it, because I just kept thinking of this bloody scene. And what's worse is that I also couldn't take The Godfather Part 2 seriously when I watched it, because I just kept thinking of that damn Disney Plus short where we saw the young Mr. Big. Oh my goodness, that short was gold. They've permanently tainted the Godfather movies for me, but I love them wholeheartedly nonetheless. And alongside these explicit references, it was only on my latest rewatch of this film that I realised that Mr. Big's henchmen are called Raymond and Kevin. I mean, it does make sense to make a Brooklyn Nine-Nine reference within this cop film. Wait a second, does this imply that these polar bears are a couple? So yeah, I think all of my gushing can show you just how much I truly love this movie. Does it have flaws? Absolutely, and I think that a lot of the criticisms leveled towards this film are fair, but none of them personally detracts from my own enjoyment of it. My only real issue with this film comes from Bellwether being a crap twist villain, but outside of that one thing, this is a consistently engaging and hilarious movie for me, which I adore every time I rewatch it, and it features some of my favourite fictional characters. Yes, I will go that far. I absolutely love this film to bits, and I'm happy that it won the Oscar. Also, at the time of making this segment, Zootopia 2 isn't out yet, but I am praying that it will be good, because I love this first film too much to be able to stomach a weak sequel. I am only cautiously optimistic though, because Disney sequels don't exactly have the best track record. But whatever happens with the sequel, I will still love this first installment till the end of my days. Oh, and one more thing. As a British person, I still do not understand why we call this film Zootropolis. What was the need for the name change? We all know what Utopia is. The pun on Utopia makes way more sense in the context of this film than the generic city pun of Metropolis. So why the hell did we change it? Alright then, I guess I have to apologise to all the Americans when I criticise them for changing the name of the Pirates and Adventure with Scientists. We're clearly just as bad as you.
I know Kung Fu. Show me. And plumbing?
Okay, so I spent a good amount of this video praising the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy. However, would you believe me when I said that that's not actually my favourite DreamWorks franchise? And before anyone asks, neither is the Shrek franchise because Shrek the Turd exists. My favourite DreamWorks franchise is actually Kung Fu Panda. I just love these movies so much. All of them. Even the latter ones are really enjoyable for me despite being significantly weaker. Yes, I am one of the 10 people who enjoyed the fourth film in spite of its many flaws. However, the first two films are the primary place where my love is directed towards, and honestly, these two films are probably the films I was most looking forward to rewatching this marathon. They are just so cool and funny and exciting and emotional at many points, and I can't get enough of them. But that does lead me on to the age-old question which has been long debated since the days of the ancient Chinese scholars. Which Kung Fu Panda film do I prefer? One or two? Well, I obviously adore both of them. But the film which I find slightly weaker and will talk about now is the first one. Yep, I prefer the sequel to the original, and we'll talk about Kung Fu Panda 2 a little bit later. For now though, I'll talk about the slightly weaker but still absolutely phenomenal Kung Fu Panda 1, which is quite possibly the greatest film which could possibly be made from a title and premise so ridiculous. I mean, come on. A fat panda doing kung fu is a silly idea, and if I didn't know any better, I'd assume that this movie was some form of generic kid slop with no artistry or value to it whatsoever, and oh my god, this movie is actually the real deal. Yeah, I think the immediate thing to praise about Kung Fu Panda is the fact that it's actually a real martial arts movie first and foremost, and a goofy family comedy second. It's a movie which, just like other martial arts movies, prioritizes its action and its messages over everything else, which means that it has a clear level of respect for its inspirations. This movie is not a parody at all. It is simply a comedic take on a pre-existing genre, just like Rango was for the Western genre. In order to see how respectable this movie is, let's start by talking about the action. Holy shit, these fight scenes are awesome! Like, seriously, these are some of the most well choreographed and exciting action scenes I have seen from any film, even outside of animation. In fact, dare I say, it's the best action from Western media in the 2000s? Remember, this was the decade where action films constantly used shaky cams and jump cuts to nauseating effect, which means that these smooth looking, visually appealing, easy to follow along action scenes were way better by comparison. Everything from the prison escape, to the bridge fight, to the final fight between Shifu and Tai Lung are all awesome. You feel every hit, the colours absolutely pop, and all of the settings feel different and unique from not just each other, but from any other movie. However, alongside the stellar direction and cinematography, the action scenes are also able to stand out thanks to the stellar animation. Now, I don't know how controversial of a statement this is to say, but I'm just gonna say it. The Kung Fu Panda movies are some of the best looking CG movies to come out pre-Spider-Verse. Seriously, they look incredible and, most importantly, they hold up really well. There is not a single frame of this movie which looks like it comes from 2008. And to think, this is the weakest looking Kung Fu Panda movie. Somehow, they get more visually appealing from here. However, the main reason for why this film works so well as a martial arts movie is thanks to its messages, which really pay homage to Chinese culture and respect the art of Kung Fu. Now, I'm not Chinese, so I'm not experienced enough to really talk too much about the cultural aspects of this film with my own points, so instead I'm just going to parrot what I've heard other people say. Basically, this film does something interesting by initially appearing to follow the Western interpretation of Kung Fu, which is all about the fighting, but then surprises its audience by representing what Kung Fu really means at its core. Kung Fu is all about expressing what's on the inside. and this, in turn, is what helps to give the wielder strength which can then be used for things like fighting or for inner peace. Poe doesn't save the day in this movie because he's an epic fighter, he succeeds because he's able to use what makes him special in order to defeat Tai Lung. This idea that there is speciality to every individual is a brilliant one which really respects the art of Kung Fu. In fact, this movie as a whole was so good at portraying Chinese culture that it caused a national debate in China all about why an American-made movie portrayed the culture better than Chinese-made movies at the time. No, I'm not joking about that, look it up. However, alongside this message of self-expression and fulfillment fitting culturally, it is also, simply put, a great message for any audience member to learn. Not to mention, Poe's self-expression and his kung fu abilities also aids the narrative, as it makes it more believable that he is actually able to defeat Tai Lung in the end. Poe takes a more unconventional approach to kung fu in comparison to Tai Lung's traditional approach, and that is what ends up throwing Tai Lung off, which ends up leading to his defeat. Once again, it's all just brilliant, and it's a perfect way to blend respect for a culture with a brilliant story with a lot to say for anyone. Seriously, this film has so much to say even outside of its kung fu heritage. A major aspect of the movie is the theme of imposter syndrome, with Poe feeling like he doesn't belong in the Jade Palace alongside the Furious Five. In fact, his internal fears are even directly spat back at him by Tigress, who straight up calls him a disgrace to kung fu. However, Poe is nonetheless an admirable figure as he keeps pushing past his doubts and remaining optimistic, which is what ultimately allows him to prove Shifu and the Five wrong as he becomes a kung fu master. Once again, it's a brilliant and inspiring message, and if you don't believe me that this is a fantastic message told in a masterful way, well, I watched scenes from this movie in a school assembly once because the teachers thought that was a great way to show us all the effects of bullying and how to move past doubts. So yeah, if school teachers use this movie as a positive example, then it must be good. The best part of that little anecdote, by the way, is the fact that it was a year 12 assembly, so everyone was between the ages of 16 and 17, and no one complained about how we were being shown clips from a kids movie. That's how respected Kung Fu Panda is. Anyway, alongside Poe, we've also got Shifu, who has his own lessons to learn which lend themselves to even more messages. The main things that Shifu has to grapple with in this movie are his failures, most importantly, the way that he failed Tai Lung. He trained Tai Lung and filled his head with dreams of greatness, which means that when they didn't come to pass, Tai Lung snapped and acted out. Shifu pushed Tai Lung to his limits for, ultimately, no reason, and his failure was what sent Tai Lung down his dark path. He's tried to run away and bury his mistakes, but by the end of the film, he owns up to it. It's such a powerful confession of wrongdoing that he even catches Tai Lung off guard in a brilliant scene where he nearly reconsiders going back to the light, before eventually snapping back into aggression. Nonetheless, despite Tai Lung being too far gone for now, Shifu is still able to find inner peace himself by the end of the film. As great as Poe's journey in this movie is, I feel like the real heart here comes from Shifu and Tai Lung's relationship. Side note, but I just want to say that Tai Lung is one of DreamWorks' best villains. He's intimidating as hell and damn capable, but he's also got an emotional side to him which equally doesn't undercut his threat. He really does show us that a villain can be complex, interesting and sympathetic, while still being, you know, a villain who is evil and memorable. Take notes, Disney. I mean, I know he got redeemed and everything in the fourth movie, but whatever, my point still stands. Honestly, Tai Lung is still my favourite Kung Fu Panda villain, largely because of the more emotional side to him, although we'll definitely talk about Lord Shen later, don't you worry. Anyway, back to Shifu's failures. I thought it was great to see him grow and adapt from his failings as he teaches Poe. He realizes that he needs to change his teaching methods, and so, as a result, teaches Poe in a way that Poe can understand. Once again, this is a great message for the audience all about how different people learn in different ways and so need to be taught accordingly. I think that overall, the messages with Shifu work especially well alongside Poe's messages because it means that the film has something to say to all audiences. Kids will enjoy Poe's optimism and awesomeness, whilst us depressed teens will relate to his feelings of self-doubt. Meanwhile, adults will connect with Shifu's journey of accepting parental mistakes and learning the best ways to teach and nurture someone. And to think, these aren't the only messages from this film, as there's also the wise, philosophical lessons from the greatest character from this franchise, Master Oogway. I love this turtle so much, and his famous quotes will forever live rent-free in my head because they are genuinely really good quotes. In fact, the line about how one often meets his destiny on the path he takes to avoid it is especially important to this franchise as it directly ties into multiple plot points such as Tai Lung's escape, which only happened because Shifu sent a bird to make sure that he wouldn't escape. Furthermore, it also directly ties into the themes of the second movie, but I'll discuss that later. Although whilst Oogway is definitely wise, he's also easily the funniest character in this movie.
Who is worthy to be trusted with the secret to limitless power to become the Dragon Warrior? I don't know.
God, there's just so much to love here, and I've got so much more that I can say. Although, I'll say some of my points about the other characters like the Furious Five and Mr. Ping for when I talk about the second movie, as they are a bit more prevalent there. For now though, I want to talk about the direction and animation again, as I really like the way it was stylized even outside of the action scenes. The training montage was presented and edited in such a cool and unique way, and I've always loved these 2D animated sequences from this franchise, such as with the opening dream sequence here. And alongside the style, the colours always pop and help many scenes to stand out. The animation also complements the music, which, as you would now expect from a Hans Zimmer score, is absolutely outstanding. These two aspects can help to make simple scenes such as Oogway's ascension absolutely mesmerizing to the point that the scene gave me so many goosebumps. And finally, I want to talk about the humour. This is, simply put, a really funny movie with not that many jokes which missed for me. Poe's naivety is always hilarious and Jack Black really adds so much to the line delivery, the physical humour like during the failed training is really strong, and, once again, Master Oogway is the GOAT. Okay, I will admit that I do feel like some of the humour in the climax undercuts Talong's presence somewhat, and it does kinda clash with the emotional fight with Shifu immediately beforehand, but that's really my only major flaw with the humour, and with the film as a whole really. Overall though, Kung Fu Panda is just a shockingly amazing movie which had no right to be as good as it was considering what its premise is. But thank God this movie is amazing, as I love it to bits and I will never tire of rewatching it. I've always loved this movie, but on this latest rewatch, I was more engrossed and emotionally invested than I ever was before, and I can see this feeling growing even further on future rewatches. It is just a bona fide banger in every way which respects its audience and the art of Kung Fu. And somehow, it's not the best Kung Fu Panda movie. Before we talk about the sequel though, we've got a load of other films we need to discuss first.
Don't mean no disrespect when I say you look like Shrek.
Shrek 2 may only be the second best movie in the Shrek cinematic universe and the third best DreamWorks sequel. However, it is still an absolute banger at the end of the day, which surpasses the original film in almost every way. But you probably already know the reasons why this film is great, as so many people have sung its praises. But screw it, I'm still going to gush about this film. Now, I'd say that the main thing this film excels at the most is its main messages all about loving oneself, as well as the imposter syndrome that many people feel even after finding connections. As I mentioned before on this list, the original Shrek presents a story about an ogre shunned from society who eventually learns to open up to others and find meaningful connections. The film showed us that everyone is worthy of friendship and love. Unless you're an arsehole like Farquaad, in which case, fuck you. It was a great message. But at the same time, it was also pretty small scale. When you really think about it, Shrek only truly connected with 2 people by the end of the film, and everyone else who supported him by the end were fellow fairy tale creatures who were also deemed as different and weird. Shrek 2 meanwhile takes the foundation set by the original film and expands them to a much larger scale, which, in turn, makes the messages a lot more profound and hard-hitting. Whilst we've seen Shrek successfully find love and have his happy ending, this film carries the story beyond the happily ever after, and brings things closer to reality in a way, as Shrek now has to meet the parents of Fiona, and this is where we discover that he is still mistreated by society in spite of everything. He is still seen as a hideous beast who doesn't deserve Fiona, and this does a great job of reflecting Shrek's own insecurities. And these insecurities come to the forefront after they are eventually exploited and manipulated by the fairy godmother in order to leave Shrek believing everything that he has been told. Despite rescuing Fiona from a dragon and drastically changing his appearance for her in order to fit with societal expectations, he still thinks that he doesn't deserve to be with her. Oh, and side note about the magic potion, it's crazy to me that Shrek 2 basically did the substance 20 years before that film. Like, the themes of body image and the desire to change that in order to fit within society's expectations of beauty are remarkably quite similar. But Shrek 2 is a lot less horrific. Either way, just like with Kung Fu Panda, DreamWorks has expertly shown the feelings of imposter syndrome that someone may feel and the effects that it can have on them and their mental state. However, I think that I slightly prefer this film's handling of the message. Whilst I do appreciate Poe's consistent optimism in the face of adversity, I think that Shrek's complete rejection of the idea that he is actually good enough is a lot more relatable for the audience. I think it's fair to say that we've all been in the position where we feel terrible about a relationship or a job position or something similar, purely because we think that we don't deserve it, even if that's not true at all. And so, we can very easily identify with Shrek's struggle within this movie. However, at the same time, the film also still ends on a very hopeful note, as it tells its audience that everyone does indeed deserve their happily ever after. Shrek really does deserve Fiona, and he doesn't need to change who he is in order to achieve that goal. That is honestly such a beautiful fairy tale ending, just a satisfying conclusion with a great message. Side note, but I really like how this film, despite still being a fairy tale subversion, feels a lot more thematically connected to the fairy tales, and is generally a lot more accepting of them. Not only does it reflect the fact that Shrek is slowly becoming more positively integrated into society and is less of an outcast by the end of this film, but it also makes this film feel more genuine and with its own identity, as it's becoming less like a Disney parody, which is what the original film was. And speaking of which, due to the heart and brilliant messages within this franchise, especially within this film, I can't fully agree with people who see the Shrek franchise as cynical, soulless garbage. You're allowed to dislike these movies if you want, but they are definitely not soulless, for the most part, as they do contain these heartfelt, inspiring messages which audiences need to hear, and it handles them all really, really well. So yeah, the heart and emotion of the first Shrek movie has been expanded upon into something much greater in its sequel, which not only makes Shrek 2 amazing as a sequel, but it also makes it an even better film than the original. However, it's not just the themes which make this film better than the original, as so many other aspects here are also superior. First of all, this film is a comedic riot. Whilst the first film's comedy largely came from the actor's line delivery, this film has a lot more jokes at its expense which are being thrown towards the audience. Now yes, the increase in jokes does mean that there are more jokes which don't land for me here, but honestly, these jokes are the minority, as the vast majority of this film is absolutely hysterical, and it makes sense why it's been memed so much. The carriage ride scene, the palace gate scene, the factory escape scene, the O.J. Simpson parody and catnip scene, the prison escape scene, and that dinner scene. Holy mackerel, that dinner scene is simultaneously anxiety-inducing, over-the-top, and hysterical. It is just perfect. Oh, and the usage of pop culture references within this movie is practically night and day when compared to Shark Tale. You see, these jokes are actually funny, and they work without knowledge of the source material. Okay, sure, some of them have dated slightly. I mean, Charlie isn't exactly a prince anymore, now is he? And all the random commercial and talk show references have not held up at all. I mean, I didn't get any of them, for instance, as they were way before my time. But these moments are so minor that it's easy to ignore, and the more explicit references to movies and whatnot are still entertaining even if you don't know the context, as the visuals are just cool. I mean, I only recently realised that the beach kiss here was a reference to From Here to Eternity, but I didn't care as the scene in question was just funny on its own merits. And alongside the references, the music is also great here once again. Every song fits the scene they are a part of expertly, and they are all so integral to the moment that you couldn't replace them with any other song. I could give multiple examples of this, but let's be honest, you just want to hear me gush about I Need a Hero, don't you? Hit it! I mean, what can be said about this scene which hasn't already been said a million times? It is genuinely one of the most badass climax sequences ever. Like, it is literally perfect. The stakes and general scope are consistently high, the tone is simultaneously epic but humorous, some of the characters neatly wrap up their arcs, and the choice of music is one of the best needle drops in any film ever. The music is so good in fact that I, as well as a lot of other people, actually prefer this cover of Holding Out to a Hero to the original Bonnie Tyler version. It is seriously that good. The themes are the number one reason for why I love this movie so much, but this scene is a close second. And alongside all these epic moments, the characters are consistently fantastic here. Shrek is as great as usual, but I've already talked about him and his arc, so I won't go any further. Meanwhile, Donkey may not seem as important here as he was in the original film, and you're right, but I still love his inclusion nonetheless, not just because he's funny, but also because I like how he's essentially become Shrek's wingman here. He's been the one constant in Shrek's life, and that's why Shrek brings him along to the supposed hunting trip with King Harold. He's a figure who Shrek can trust, and I think that this was a great way to show how strong their friendship really is, and how it's grown from the original. However, alongside these guys, this film also introduces so many new characters which have since become so iconic to the franchise that it feels weird not seeing them in the original. The King and Queen could have been really bland here, but they absolutely crack me up, especially Harold, although that's no big surprise considering the fact that they got John Cleese to play him. And alongside them, we've also got an amazing villain in this movie, in the form of the Fairy Godmother, who just completely blows Farquaad out of the water. Not only is she also absolutely hysterical and manic, but she actually poses a legitimate threat throughout the course of the film, and she directly ties into Shrek's insecurities, which really aids the themes of the movie. She's honestly everything that you could want from a villain. She's got just the right levels of hamminess, malice, and thematic purpose within the narrative. And to think, I've only just scratched the surface of the characters, as this movie also introduces Prince Charming, Captain Hook, Simon Cowell, and Doris, voiced by Jonathan Ross. Ew. You know what, I think I'll stick with the original US version of this film which has Larry King instead. And of course, let's not forget about Puss in Boots, baby! Yeah, of course I'm going to be happy to see Puss in Boots make his grand introduction in this film, as he is just amazing and I love him so much. Although, whilst he's definitely a funny, badass Zorro homage within this film, the main thing that I enjoy about him here is his arc where he wants to help out Shrek as much as he can in order to make up for the fact that he was sent by King Harold to kill him. Puss may appear to be this fierce warrior who shows no mercy, but deep down, he's really noble and always tries to do the right thing to make up for any mistakes that he may have made. His redemption is a great little character journey for him to have here, and it's one of many reasons for why I love him so much as a character, and it's also why he was such an icon for me when growing up. Although, I won't lie, the main reason for why I loved him as a kid was because he was cool as hell and freaking adorable, and yeah, those points still stand. So overall, the characters are amazing in this movie. Apart from Fiona. Yeah, this seems to be just a me problem, but I really feel like Fiona gets almost nothing to do by the second half of this film. All she really does is sit around the castle for a bit before getting affected by the potion as well. She's definitely a crucial part of Shrek's character arc, and she serves the narrative purpose well, as she was the one who made the final choice to stay as an ogre. But that's kind of it, to be honest. She doesn't really feel like her own character this time around, unlike in the original. However, that is literally my only problem with this movie. Apart from that relatively minor point, I totally understand the hype that this film gets, and I love it to bits.
Emotional damage!
Due to my earlier praise of the creativity of Pete Docter movies, it is hardly a surprise that I am a big fan of Inside Out. I know this film is often ranked as one of the weaker Docter films, but for me, it was always this film which resonated with me the most, and this has been the case since I was a kid. For the longest time, this was my favourite Pixar movie, because I was just enamoured by the themes, ideas, and creativity present here. And whilst there's obviously now movies which I prefer, Inside Out still holds a very special place in my heart, and after rewatching it many times in my life, including with friends on a Discord call where we were all crying by the end, yeah, I can safely say that I still adore this film. Now, seeing as I've already mentioned the creativity a few times, I may as well start my praise for this film by talking about that first. Put simply, the ways that this film portrays psychology is so damn clever, fun, and easy for an audience to understand. The main parts of the world like core memories, islands of personality, and the control of the emotions are made very clear to the audience, and they all just make sense, and this strong foundation makes it easy to get on board with everything else that this film throws your way. And that's good, because there are some really complex psychological ideas which are explored within this film, such as abstract thought, which I still don't entirely understand, yet this film is nonetheless able to portray ideas such as this in a weird yet creative way which sticks with you. And because you're able to get a grasp on this world, these weirder elements become that bit easier to understand. But it's not just the complex stuff which is great here, as the film is also teeming with so many other creative and fun set pieces which link into parts of the mind. The Dream Productions movie set is the kind of idea which is ripe for fun moments, and this film absolutely takes advantage of that. Imagination Land is a brilliant, unique location, and it features a Chinatown reference which is pretty funny, and I love some of the literalism that this film employs through things like the train of thought being a literal train. That's just a fun idea, plain and simple. And on the whole, the creativity adds a lot to the film's entertainment value, as these wacky ideas are often really funny to see on the screen. I mean, I love gags like the brain freeze one for instance, because it's just an absurd idea which still makes sense within this world, and in execution, it's just hilarious to see it actually happen in front of you. And on that topic, this movie is just really damn funny. The main cast all bounce off each other really well, and as I said during my discussion of the sequel, Fear, Disgust, and Anger are definitely the funniest characters in this movie. They are all so different from each other, which means that they clash in the best possible way. Also, Fear's dream duty shift is priceless from his reactions to the stuff which actually happens on screen. It's a bit of darker humour, but I love it. And as for some other entertaining stuff, Bing Bong is an absolute delight of a character. The girl scene is one of the funniest Pixar scenes out there. And I've also started to get my own personal enjoyment out of the fact that the hot dad is played by Kyle MacLachlan of all people. Okay, what is Special Agent Dale Cooper doing in my Pixar movie? In such a minor role, come on, he deserves to be a main character. Yeah, if you couldn't tell, I love Kale. I think he's a great actor, and after getting into David Lynch and especially Twin Peaks this year, I've found new things to love about this film purely because of his presence. Now, obviously Bill Anderson is nowhere near as epic as Coop, but he is still fun, and call me Quentin Tarantino because I liked the foot scene. I thought that was really funny. So yeah, this film is hilarious and creative, but that doesn't stop it from being an emotional powerhouse like the best of Pixar, which makes sense in this context because this movie is literally about emotions. Now yes, this movie is definitely a much easier watch for me than its sequel, but it is still very effective in what it had to say. I mentioned before that this film did a great job at portraying complex psychological ideas in an easy to digest way, and that can most clearly be seen in the ending of this film, where we essentially see Riley sink into a depression, but it's a very accurate depiction of one. Instead of having Riley feel sad, she's instead numb and out of touch with her emotions. The world becomes increasingly grey and drab, and she's unable to think straight. You can even say that she completely loses her train of thought. It's quite upsetting to see, but was really fascinating to watch unfold, and it's only when she embraces the negative emotion of sadness that she comes to terms with what she's doing and returns home to the comfort of her family, in what is a beautiful way to end the movie. It's a great showcase into how the support of others is necessary in order to help people cope during difficult times, and it's just wonderful to watch unfold. But I think that these ideas related to depression also link in well to the main theme which permeates throughout the whole film, all about toxic positivity. And these themes are great because they directly link into Joy's main character arc. You see, Joy is a well-meaning character. She wants the best for Riley and assumes that keeping her permanently happy is the best thing to do, because, on paper, that sounds great. But the reality is that you can't always be happy. There are going to be difficult, upsetting situations in life, and sometimes the only way to appropriately respond to them is through negative emotions. But Joy's belief that Riley should stay happy all day long leads to these negative emotions, particularly sadness, to be pushed aside. Throughout the opening of this movie, Joy is a controlling leader who shows visible irritation when the other emotions do their job, and things like the circle of sadness are really cruel when you think about it. She's actually a pretty unlikable character at the start, all things considered. She hides behind a joyous exterior, which thus means that it can be very easy to get swept up in her charisma. But when you stop and really think about it, she is incredibly toxic and controlling. I mean, for example, on the first night of moving in, things are going rough, and Sadness assumes that she should drive in order to make it clear to both Riley and her parents that she's struggling with the change. But Joy doesn't let her. In hindsight, this moment arguably started the domino chain of pain that led to the events of this movie. Joy should have let Sadness take over, because being in touch with your emotions is what helps you to understand yourself. And this idea is consistently shown well throughout the course of this film, such as the part where Sadness is the only one who can comfort Bing Bong after he loses his rocket. Meanwhile, Joy acts as more of an annoyance rather than a comfort. But, after the events of this film, Joy grows as a character. She learns the importance of sadness, and eventually, when she finds herself in the memory dump, she embraces her own sadness in what is, once again, a really emotionally impactful scene. It's a fantastic way to get an insight into why she acts the way that she does, and it's just satisfying to see her realize where she went wrong. Honestly, Joy may have my favourite character arc from any Pixar movie. It's a storyline where she goes from being controlling as a result of good intentions, to eventually coming to terms with the truth of why sadness is important, before eventually learning to let go and improve, while still remaining true to herself. It's a fantastic arc, and I think it's dumb of people to call the film bad because Joy is quote-unquote the villain. Like, no she isn't. She's a flawed protagonist who goes through a compelling character arc. There is a difference. So yeah, Joy's character growth leads in well to a lot of the emotion. Oh, and I also just want to mention that alongside the memory dump scene and the ending, I also cry at Bing Bong being forgotten. He did not deserve that, and I hate seeing such a lovable character fade away. I also find the scene quite tragic in the sense that as we grow up, we become more disconnected from our childhood until it fades away entirely. It's like our imagination and innocence goes with age, which is a thought that's really sad to think about. So overall, I love Inside Out because it does a phenomenal job with its emotions and creative world building. The film also looks amazing and the music is top tier. Seriously, Bundle of Joy may be one of my favourite movie themes ever. It is so beautiful. However, whilst I do love most of this movie, I will still agree that it does have some big plot holes. Now, I can get behind some of the plot conveniences, like Honesty Island just so happening to crash into the train, because I like the theory that the mind was screwing with Joy and wouldn't let her get back to headquarters until she learnt a lesson. But there are some other things here which I just can't get behind, and yes, these are the same points that other people make. But seriously, why didn't they just send the core memories back to HQ like they did with the gum commercial? And why did Joy feel the need to wake Riley up? You literally said that nothing bad can happen to her while she's asleep, so just be patient for goodness sake.
I hate being patient. Patience is for wimps.
However, a few egregious plot holes really can't take away from how impactful the rest of this movie has been for me throughout my life. It's not my favourite Pixar movie nowadays, but I still understand why it used to be, and I do still adore it. Yet somehow, it's only the second best movie from the 2015 batch to cover themes of depression. But boy oh boy, that other film is truly something. But anyway, let's move on to some other films. But fair warning, we have got a couple of bleaker movies coming up, so do prepare yourself.
Fuck, man. What else is there to say?
Flea is without a shadow of a doubt the most difficult movie for me to discuss on this list. Not only is it a documentary, which is a medium I am grossly uneducated on, but the subject matter here is very difficult to watch and discuss. Whilst I may have discussed other difficult topics on this list, like the racism themes of Zootopia, or the psychological torment of Anomalisa, or the political violence of Persepolis, this is much harder for me, because you see, the dark elements of those films are still slightly undercut for me by the fact that they are just movies. Even Persepolis, which is loosely based on true events and is focused around a real instance of political turmoil, still feels inherently fictional. It's got a cartoony art style, it has quirky moments which break the rules of reality in a way, and Margie is still being played by an actor who's reading lines in a safe recording booth. The film is not one-to-one with real life, even if the story came about because of real issues. Flea, meanwhile, doesn't have that luxury. For all of its artistry, it is still as real as you can get. The film follows Amin as he discusses his life as a refugee escaping from Afghanistan in the 1980s. We hear about the constant turmoil that he had to face when he was stuck in Russia, and we are forced to listen to the constant hardships that he endured in order to flee to Denmark, where he currently resides. Through Amin's story, we grow to understand the trauma of this whole situation, the mistreatment, the isolation, the horrible conditions placed on them as they're trafficked, and the fact that Amin has been split up from parts of his family. It's horrible to listen to a lot of the time, but the reason for why it's so impactful is because this is all real. And I don't just mean that the story is based on true events, I more so mean that it is real because Amin is telling his personal story. This is not an actor, this is the real person. Everything that we are being told was directly experienced by the person telling it. They are reliving their trauma in order to share their story with the world in an attempt to be able to cope with it. And that's the truly disturbing thing about this film. It is so easy to read news stories all about the horrific things that refugees go through, but to actually hear it firsthand from someone who is there is a lot more impactful, as we now have a more personal connection to the story. We grow to like Amin over the course of the film, as he's a very honest, down-to-earth kind of guy, but because of that, it is so hard to listen to what he and his family had to go through. And on that topic, I think that the animation complements the documentary style of this film really well. We obviously were not there to experience Amin's story, and there obviously wouldn't have been footage made about it. So, to make up for that, this film uses a combination of archival footage and animation to help bring visuals to Amin's story. The film could have very easily used live-action recreations, but I liked the animated approach as it not only made the film's presentation more memorable, but it also allowed for creative flourishes within the visuals, such as during the parts where it went a bit more sketchy to reflect the more uncertain or potentially fictitious moments. It was a clear distinction which visually stuck out to me. Now, I will admit that at first I was a bit put off the animation, as it is very jerky and unnatural feeling, but eventually I warmed to it as it felt more like a visual way to represent the fact that memories aren't the most clear and can sometimes come out in a disjointed way. But the main reason for why I found the animated recreations of the events here so impactful is because it brings a lot of additional weight to Amin's story. It's one thing to listen to someone tell you about the trauma that they endured, but it's another thing entirely to actually see it. And whilst we will never be able to see it firsthand, we still get a feel for what it was like for Amin, which therefore allows for the story to remain impactful. Flea very clearly aims to do two main things. The first is to provide an outlet for Amin to tell his story, which is essential for him when dealing with his trauma. Amin is struggling with the idea of settling down with his boyfriend Casper because of the trauma of his past, which he's been afraid to open up to his partner about. However, this film gave him the opportunity to open up properly. And what's better is that, because of the animated nature of the documentary, Amin can still remain somewhat anonymous, which is important for him because what he ends up saying within the doc could get him in trouble. For example, when he turns himself in as a refugee in Denmark, he had to lie about his family being killed in order to avoid being deported. And because of this fact, Amin constantly worries that if the truth gets out, then there is a possibility of deportation because the law is fucking stupid sometimes. Telling his story within this medium was the only way that he could find closure and make others aware of the hardships that he and so many others went through, while still maintaining his own safety. And this point about the hardships leads me on to the other reason for why this film was made. You see, Flea was very clearly designed in a way to allow its audience to truly come to terms with and understand the plight of refugees and the hardships that they endure. It is an honest, brutally realistic look into one man's trauma which was caused by all of these events, and the film also highlights the trauma that his family endured as well. Flea is designed for the audience to feel sympathy towards not just Amin, but all refugees and asylum seekers. It is a tough watch because the situation is tough, and the film knows when to focus on the truly hard-hitting details. And for me, the part which has stuck out the most and is the main thing I am constantly thinking back on as I read the news nowadays, is that scene on the boat. Amin and his family are trying their best to escape from Russia. They are staying in Russia illegally and need to escape to Sweden in order to meet up with the rest of the family who managed to escape already. They are forced to be smuggled by traffickers and are stuck crossing the Baltic Sea on this crowded boat. They end up stuck on the water for days after the engine goes out, and it is just a horrible traumatic situation for everybody. But then, a cruise ship spots them, and finally, there's hope. All of these people were so desperate to get out of their current horrible situation that they resorted to trusting shady traffickers and going on a dodgy boat across the sea for days. It is a horrible sequence of events, but it's satisfying to see that their hardships are all over now. They've been saved, they'll be taken to land, and things will improve. At least, that's what everyone on the boat thinks. Until the crew of the ship announced that they will be taking them to Estonia, where they will be held in custody for their illegal crossing. Due to the fact that this scene was nowhere near the end of the film, I knew that things wouldn't end well here. But that didn't stop me from being devastated in this moment. All of the hardship was ultimately for nothing, and now Amin, his family, and the other passengers have found themselves in arguably a worse place than where they were when they started. All after this initial false hope which came in the form of fake salvation. It is such a hard-hitting moment and is structured in just a way to be as impactful as possible. But the main reason for why it stuck with me so much is because it has reinforced how much I fucking despise all of the anti-immigration policies out there. Look, I know I've had some patriotic moments within this ranking, but some of this bullshit makes me ashamed to be British. These rich arsehole politicians who have never experienced a day of suffering in their life are punishing those who have very clearly suffered enough. Do you seriously think it's a choice for these people? Do you think they go with these shady traffickers and ride overcrowded, dangerous boats for the fun of it? No, they fucking don't. They are doing it because they are desperate. Their situation is so bad that they are willing to risk their life for a chance of a better one. Yet all these governments are doing is making things worse for them by deporting them back to the dangerous countries which they try to escape from, or by deporting them to fucking Rwanda for some fucking reason. It is disgusting to see how much the most vulnerable people are being exploited and bullied by those who will never understand what their situation is like. And trust me, this is not an exclusively British issue. Every first world country is guilty of this. I mean, the cruise ship in this film is Norwegian after all. It is a major issue and it's one which I feel very passionately about, as you can probably tell from my commentary. And these passionate feelings I have towards this issue is why Flea hit me so hard, especially in this scene. It is a brutally honest, sympathetic look into what people like Amin have to go through. I am never going to experience anything that's even 1/10 as traumatic as Amin, so who would I be to dictate his life? Instead, I just have to watch this film as I come to terms with the struggles of so many. And this is why I think that Flea should be mandatory viewing for everyone, especially every politician. They need to know the real struggle, and maybe then they will finally realize why people cross borders illegally. It's because they have no choice, but it's never the easy alternative. I would not wish Amin's struggles on anyone. So yeah, it's clear that I had a very visceral, emotional reaction to this film. But the emotions weren't just anger or sadness, as there are actually some moments here which do inspire positive feelings, and the main example of that can be seen through Amin's sexuality. Because you see, Amin is gay, and like a lot of other countries within that part of the world, being gay is not good within Afghanistan. Amin has been struggling with his sexuality for years, out of fear of being punished and disowned by his family. But eventually, after making it to Sweden with his older brother and other sisters who escaped before him, he comes out to them. And how does his brother react? By taking him to a gay bar and admitting that the family always knew. Look, as a queer person myself, I am grateful to have supportive parents, but I know that I am really lucky in that regard. For many people, coming out is one of the hardest things to do as a result of the reasonable fear that so many people have of their family not accepting them. And Amin's fears were very valid because, as I said, being gay is shamed in countries like Afghanistan. Yet, as a result of all these fears and assumptions that both Amin and the audience had, it was immensely satisfying to actually see Amin accepted by his family. It was a wholesome, positive moment which left me really choked up. It was just beautiful to see, and was a nice cap to the misery of the rest of this film. Although I will admit that on the topic of Amin's sexuality, I do wish that we got more of Casper and his relationship with Amin. We definitely get a little bit of it, but the film is mostly focused on the past, and I would have liked just a little bit more of the present situation so we can fully understand where Amin is currently at in life. But with the exception of this incredibly minor nitpick, I adored Flea. It is not an easy watch, but it is an essential watch. I may not be the biggest documentary fan in the world, but this was a film which I was able to get a lot out of, so don't let its presentation put you off. You should definitely watch it. It probably goes without saying, but the fact that the Academy had the audacity to lump this film in as one of those kids movies that adults have to endure is quite frankly disgusting and is a massive disservice to the struggles that Amin went through, and the difficulties that he probably faced when recounting these horrible events. It's no coincidence that the Best Animated Feature Award started to be treated much better after the rightful controversy over this. But unfortunately, I feel like there's more people who have seen this Oscars moment than have actually seen the film which disproved this comment. So please, I beg you, watch Flea if you haven't already. It is absolutely worth your time. Now, I will admit that there is still one other super bleak movie which I will need to discuss soon, but thankfully, due to how the ranking ended up, we do actually get to have a little bit of a palate cleanser before then. So let's enjoy talking about a lighter film whilst we still can before getting back to the serious stuff.
I'm just a kid, where I see love, she sees a friend.
You know, I shouldn't be allowed to complain about feeling old, because I'm only 19. I am still young, all things considered. However, there are certain things out there which make me feel absolutely ancient, and the main thing which does that for me is Toy Story 3. Because you see, Toy Story 3 was the first film I ever watched in cinemas all the way back in 2010. I must have been around 4 years old at the time, and to be honest, watching this film back in the day is one of my earliest memories. This means that whenever I am reminded of how old this film is, I feel like I belong in the retirement home. What do you mean this film is 15 years old? That's just not right! There's no way that it's been that long. Right? Oh god, I've grown up. This doesn't feel right. Oh well, at least this is just nostalgic memories. Thank goodness the film itself won't make me feel old too, and what do you mean Andy is 17 and preparing for college? I was 17 when I saw this movie for this ranking. Yes, it was that long ago, and I'm currently in the midst of college life. Oh my god. I am now at the age where this film truly speaks to me. You see, as a kid watching this in the cinema back in 2010, it was hard for me to fully comprehend the fact that I would eventually make it to this point. Yeah, here we are. It is a truly surreal feeling to grow up and fully appreciate a movie that has always been a part of my life. But I think that fact helped to truly elevate the viewing experience of this film for me when I rewatched it recently. However, even outside of my recent age biases, this movie is still absolutely fantastic. And one immediate reason for why is because this film is easily one of the best legacy sequels ever made. Now, legacy sequels have a bit of a bad rap for being unnecessary and nostalgia baity. However, I do think that they can be done well. If a legacy sequel acknowledges the time jump and uses that as a way to tell interesting new stories, whilst also fitting within the franchise and working well as its own story, then I think it's good. Top Gun Maverick is an amazing legacy sequel, for example, because the film has aged with Maverick whilst expanding upon plot points from the original film, which only just became significant because of the time jump. However, in spite of all the new plot points, it still feels distinctly like a Top Gun movie, due to having cool plane action and Tom Cruise doing kick-ass stunts. Meanwhile, the Star Wars sequels, everyone's favourite, often felt like unnecessary inclusions, which, in spite of some interesting ideas, were ultimately bogged down by too much pandering to original trilogy fans, which thus meant that it didn't fully expand upon its own story, and thus didn't properly continue the greater narrative of Star Wars. Toy Story 3, meanwhile, is definitely one of the good legacy sequels, and the main reason for why it works for me is because it grew up with its audience. The kids who watched Toy Story 1 back in 1995 were most likely getting ready for college in 2010 when Toy Story 3 released, so the film was able to resonate with its audience in a completely new way, whilst also aging super well in the minds of the kids who watched Toy Story 3 when it came out and are now in college, like me. Furthermore, I feel like the legacy nature of the sequel also helps to aid the main theme of the film, all about growing up. Because the audience has been able to feel both themselves and Andy grow up, it becomes a lot more investing to watch the plight of the toys who have to deal with the fact that their owner has grown past them. It makes the story a lot more compelling and impactful than it normally would be, and I think that is why so many people find the ending so emotional. We've grown up with these characters over 3 movies, and whether you've known them for 15 years or just 1, it's still so emotional to see the end to Andy's story. I also feel like this film is really effective because it works amazingly well as a follow-up to the second movie. The second movie is all about the importance that a toy brings to a kid, with Woody realizing that Andy will value him a lot more than the museum would. This means that by the end of the film, he decides to stay with Andy for infinity and beyond, which is a line cleverly referenced within this film too, and is the major driving force behind Woody's ideology at the start of this film, which thus helps to explain why he's unwilling to move on. However, this belief is then contrasted with the ending of this film, where Woody officially decides to move on from Andy and go with Bonnie instead. As Andy grows up, Woody will continue to be treated just like a museum piece if he ends up going to college, and so he instead decides that it's better for him to make another kid happy. That is such a brilliant continuation which still fits so well within the Toy Story universe. Once again, this legacy sequel feels necessary, and the continuation from the previous films is what ultimately makes the ending to this story so effective and satisfying. Now, I know a lot of people will say that the ending has since been ruined by the existence of Toy Story 4, but I don't know if that's the case for me, as I still nearly cried when Woody said "so long, partner," so clearly I still thought that was effective. And I think that the main reason for why I was still so moved by this ending is because the emotion comes less so from the toys leaving Andy, and more so from the fact that Andy has had to grow up past his childhood. He's done something which we will all have to do eventually, and that's why we feel so sad when he leaves his childhood behind him. So yeah, this ending still works for me, even if it was definitely better a decade ago. I just hope that Toy Story 5 doesn't end up dampening this ending even more. Anyway, that's enough about the ending. In a similar vein to Up, I feel like a lot of people judge these films purely on one emotional scene, when there is actually so much more that's worth discussing. And in Toy Story 3's case, when the film isn't tugging on your heartstrings through themes of growing up, it's entertaining you with a really fun prison escape story. Yeah, a prison escape story is something which I never would have expected Pixar to tackle, yet they did it anyway, in a really creative way I might add. A daycare being used as a prison setting is certainly a novel idea, but I think it works really well, as its liveliness during the day is able to effectively contrast the darker and more intense nighttime scenes. And alongside the unique setting, the main escape portion of the movie is just consistently really creative in its execution. The plan itself is very elaborate and quite nonsensical all things considered, but that's honestly why I love it. It's just really fun and memorable more than anything else. And speaking of fun, I think these scenes work especially well for me because they are oftentimes absolutely hilarious. Now, I don't think that this film is as funny as the second movie, as nothing will be better than that amazing traffic cone scene, but this film does still have plenty of hysterical moments to it. I mean, come on, the Barbie and Ken scenes are just peak. There's no other way to say it. Any scene with these two together is absolute gold. And alongside these epic Barbenheimer scenes, we've got Spanish Buzz, which is one of the most random and ludicrous ideas Pixar has ever had for a plot point, but my god, it is also absolute gold. And speaking of funny things related to this movie, you have no idea how much I laughed when I heard the box comment in Cool Hand Luke, because I had no idea that Toy Story 3 referenced that film. So yeah, it was really fun to stumble upon the source of a reference unintentionally. However, whilst these parts of the movie can be really funny at many points, I feel like the main prison escape plotline works as well as it does because it is very tense when it needs to be. And this is largely thanks to Lotso, who is easily one of Pixar's best villains. He is someone who you just love to hate, which thus makes him really entertaining, but he does pose a legitimate threat at the same time. And he actually has an interesting backstory which explains his motivations without dampening him as a villain. He's able to be interesting, but still threatening. And alongside that, I think that Lotso also links into what is potentially an interesting theme with this movie, although I have no idea if this is intentional or not. You see, I think that this movie may be a criticism of the American dream. Stick with me here, I've got some evidence. You see, the new toys at Sunnyside get put in with the little kids who can't play with them properly, and it's only after they serve their time that they get to move to the big kids room. Lotso believes that everyone should spend time with the little kids before they get the privilege to be played with properly. He basically says that in order to be happy and satisfied, all the toys have to do is work hard for a few years. However, in reality, most toys don't end up surviving the little kids room because they get bashed and broken. And this is just like the American dream, which states that anyone can be successful if they work hard. However, in reality, this just isn't the case, as people in poverty will usually be unable to escape. They're stuck in a cycle of despair where the elite don't help them, as they personally believe that everyone should just help themselves. It's just like the classes system of Toy Story 3. Or maybe I'm overthinking this, I don't know. Either way, Lotso is a great villain. I just wish that he died in the fire at the end, as that would have been a lot more satisfying. Oh yeah, I should probably talk about that fire. Holy shit, how did Pixar get away with the incinerator scene? Like, I've seen horror movie scenes less dark than this scene. Our favourite toys were ready to just accept death? Excuse me? But you know what? I love it. It's one of the most tense and memorable scenes from the whole movie for a reason. Like, yeah, you know they're not gonna die, but the acceptance is what is truly haunting about this moment. And speaking of memorable sequences, I just want to talk about how much I love the opening train scene. First of all, it always reminds me of the opening levels of the Toy Story 3 video games. Yeah, remember these bad boys from back in the day? Oh man, the memories are flooding back to me. Actually, here's a fun fact about myself. The DS version of this game, which is totally different from the console version just so you know, was actually the very first video game I ever completed as a kid. I loved it back then, and I still love it now. I distinctly remember beating it once again after I had some teeth removed a few years back, and it was a great distraction from the pain. Honestly, these games are probably some of the best movie tie-in games ever made. Like, they are legitimately really good. I'd honestly recommend playing them. And now that I think about it, I may actually be more nostalgic for these games than the movie itself, which is kinda weird to say. Anyway, I got sidetracked. Let's get back to talking about the train scene. The other main reason for why I love this opening so much is because of how it successfully reflects a child's imagination. Its plot points are random and absurd, and that really helps it to feel like we are watching a child have fun with his toys. And the fun nature of the scene captures the true essence of why toys are so important to a child. Plus, it has some nice callbacks to the first two movies without feeling too in your face. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything that I have left to say. Overall, I love pretty much all of Toy Story 3. It works so well as a legacy sequel which continues on for the original 90s films, while still working as its own fun and engaging prison escape story. It's got great animation and music as you would expect, whilst also having a pitch perfect pace, and I always enjoy rewatching it. Some people may argue that it's too similar to the second movie, but I don't really see it, as I feel like the films are tonally distinct from one another. Although, whilst I disagree with that criticism, I will admit that I do still agree with the criticism that the toys should have believed Woody when he told them that Andy was putting them in the attic. Like, the toys have known each other for over a decade. Why don't they believe Woody? And what would he have to gain from lying to them about something so significant? However, that is literally my only major criticism with this film. At the end of the day, I still think that this is one of Pixar's best films and was a perfect end to the Toy Story franchise. Why did they have to continue? Oh well, at least this film has Totoro. Totoro makes everything better for me.
Okay then. That's what I'll do. I will tell you a story.
And now we're back to talking about serious topics once again. And instead of focusing on a story about a man escaping from Afghanistan, the Breadwinner gives us one of the most brutal looks into the everyday struggles of women under the Taliban rule in Afghanistan. As I'm sure most of you are aware, Afghanistan ranks as by far the worst country when it comes to women's rights. The Taliban have made an effort to strip back any and all rights for women within the country, thus leading to regular abuse and mistreatment. And just like with the treatment of refugees, hearing about this makes me so fucking angry. Look, in contrast to what you may be thinking within these segments, I actually keep most of my political opinions to myself. It's a private thing after all, and what I believe is usually none of your business. But there are some exceptions for me, and I will not hide the fact that I believe in basic human rights for all. I despise discrimination, and I am open about that. I will call out TERFs, I will call out politicians who make the lives of the vulnerable even worse, and I will call out horrible sexist organizations like the Taliban for their constant mistreatment of women. I just think it's horrible that this has happened, and because of these beliefs that I have, I just knew before going in that the Breadwinner would leave a substantial impact on me. I assumed that it would be one of the most difficult viewing experiences from this whole list, and would reinforce my disdain for the Taliban regime. And I was dead right about that. The Breadwinner left me upset and furious. The fact that a large percentage of our population can be treated as dirt for no reason just angers me to my very core. Yes, as a cis man, I will never understand the struggles that women go through. I can admit that. But I am willing to listen. Being educated on these struggles is so important because when you develop that sympathy, you develop a greater understanding of the world and those around you. When men learn what women go through, they should use that as a way to become better people who treat women with respect rather than as an object. And I think for that reason, the story of the women of Afghanistan is an especially important one to be aware of. This is a country where women's rights have reached an absolute low point. Sexism exists everywhere in the world, but you can at least say that in most countries, women are allowed to, show their face outside the house. That's not the case here. Women are not allowed to do anything out of fear of abuse and punishment, and so, if a woman like Pavana wants to make a difference, she has to disguise herself as a man. Afghanistan is the ultimate example of why sexism and the patriarchy is bad, and getting a first-hand look into the struggles that these women go through every day of their lives is one step closer to understanding these issues. And whilst the movie of The Breadwinner is a fictional narrative based within true events rather than a real documentary, it is still nonetheless very effective at demonstrating these issues, because we are forced to see all this mistreatment and sexism through the eyes of a woman, specifically a child. This child is forced to grow up way too fast as she has to become the new breadwinner for her family after her father's arrested. And in a strange way, Pavana's story ends up being a lot like Mulan's. A young woman is forced to disguise herself as a man in order to take over her father's place in the family. Yet, whilst Mulan is a heroic story of perseverance and overcoming prejudice to show the world what you are capable of, The Breadwinner is an unflinchingly realistic portrait of casual sexism and misogyny within a society. Pavana is forced to put herself in danger because she literally has no alternative. The only one who is allowed to work within this family of women and children is now gone. How else can the family live unless someone risks everything in order to provide for them? The desperation and constant danger that Pavana is forced to deal with at a young age is heartbreaking to see, but it's realistic. There's so many real-life examples of women who disguise themselves as men in order to survive within Afghan society. Hell, within this movie we meet Shozia, who is also a woman with the same idea as Pavana, and this character shows to me just how universal the struggle of women here really is. And I think that it also does a great job at linking into one of the main themes of the movie, all about how people will always rise up in spite of the danger of their situation. It is often said that the women of Afghanistan are the bravest women in the world because they have to deal with all of this shit, yet many still take the risk to live as well as they can, and many will even make the effort to stand up for what's right in spite of oppression. And I think that this idea is reflected well within this film, not just through Pavana's desperation, but also through her family eventually standing up for themselves at the end of the film in a really satisfying way. And I think that this idea of standing up for what's right also links in well to the masterful quote which ends the movie. "Raise your words, not your voice. It is the rain that makes the flowers grow, not thunder." This is a really powerful line which I fully agree with. So yeah, it's clear that this film makes an effort to highlight the women's struggles within the country. It's what I expected from this film before going in, and it's what I got. But I was also surprised by how the men were portrayed here. Whilst there are many horrible men within this film, there were also some surprisingly likeable ones. The thing is, with a country as horribly misogynistic as Afghanistan, it can be easy to assume that all the men are sexist. But that's never going to be the case. There is no way that every person shares the same beliefs as the Taliban, and the film highlights this fact by showing off nice men, like Pavana's father, and, most notably, Razak. He started off as a bit of a grumpy guy, but eventually, we grew to sympathise with him during that heartbreaking scene where Pavana read a letter to him which revealed that his wife died. And then, by the end of the film, Razak finds out that Pavana's a girl, but despite that, he still decides to help her to rescue her imprisoned father. This shows that even in the most horrible situation, basic decency and humanity can still shine through. And in this film's case, a man in Afghanistan can still have the decency to treat a woman with a basic level of respect, and moments like this help the film to feel strangely hopeful in a way. And on this topic of men, I found the character of Idris really fascinating. Now, on the surface, he seemed like a generic sexist prick working for the Taliban, but eventually, he's enlisted to fight against the US Army, because this film is set around the time of the occupation, and he is terrified. He is still a young lad at the end of the day, and is not ready to fight, yet he's still being forced to. Now, we don't know what ultimately happened to him, but we can probably assume that he was most likely killed. And because of this, the film does something interesting by showing that the men of Afghanistan, especially the younger generations, are just as trapped as the women, but in a different way. The women are physically trapped, mistreated, and forced to stay inside, whilst the men are indoctrinated and eventually trapped within the Taliban's ideology. They're forced to believe these misogynistic ideas and are eventually forced to fight for the regime and get killed in the process. They may appear like they have all the control, but in reality, they're under the spell of the regime, which shows that people like Idris are actually much more sympathetic than they may appear on the surface. It's an interesting but even-handed look into the issues that's being faced within the country, and it led to me thinking about something which I never really considered beforehand. Anyway, the final thing which I want to mention regarding this movie is the Sullivan story which Pavana tells throughout the course of this film. Now, the reason for why I want to mention it is because my feelings are a little bit conflicted, I'll admit. On the one hand, it provides for some nice levity within the narrative, it links in well to the themes of rising up, and the ending twist where it's revealed that Sullivan was in fact Pavana's brother who was killed by a landmine was really effective and impactful. But, because it's disconnected from the main narrative due to being a bit of a semi-fantasy tale, I definitely didn't care as much about these scenes as I did the real world scenes. It didn't take too much time away from what I did love about this film, but it is the one part of the movie to just be good rather than exceptional. But it's not a big deal. Overall, I thought that The Breadwinner was a heartbreaking masterpiece which everyone should watch. But, just like Flea, it's one which I'm probably not going to rewatch anytime soon for obvious reasons. Look, I love these movies, but they're definitely not favourites of mine. Brutally realistic and hard-hitting movies are never usually films which I like to call favourites, because for me, my favourite films are the ones which I can always go back to, and that's something which can't be said for the Afghan duology. They are near-perfect movies, but personally, I like 20 other movies more, because even if they can be hard-hitting, I'm much more willing to return to them. But that's no slag towards either of these films. They were specifically designed to be hard-hitting and impactful, and they absolutely succeed on that front. Please watch them to maybe learn a thing or two about kindness and empathy.